3.
All right, it's Wednesday, so you know what that means. I don't know what that means. We got a special guest today, Keri Smith, the host of Deprogrammed and the founder of Civility dinners. How's it going?
It's going well.
You had coffee downstairs. It's pretty good, huh?
Yeah, I brought this all the way from Georgetown.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Got it this morning?
Yeah.
On the way? And then you sat at a rival coffee shop and drank a product that you didn't buy there.
I did. I enjoyed it also.
Oof.
You guys have a nice studio.
Yeah, it's all right. Those guys do all the work. I just kind of sit here and say weird shit. So it's a good deal for me. Yeah. That flag actually came from near where you grew up. It's from some dude in Greer, I believe.
Oh, South Carolina.
Yeah,
Right.
my brother gave it to me. So let's get right into it. You described yourself as a former or reformed social justice warrior. Before we talk about the reform part, I want to talk about the foundation. What was it that got you into, I guess, activism or whatever in the first place?
Oh, into social justice?
Yeah, was there like one particular issue?
No, it's actually, I think it functions a lot like a cult. And so you get into it by degrees. And back when I got into it, it was over 20 years ago at Duke University. I never encountered it.
What years were, not to date you or anything, I'm just curious if you were there at the same time as Tucker Max, because he was there like in the late 90s, right?
Yeah, I was there in the late 90s. I graduated in 2000.
I think there might be some overlap. So you two
I was in the women's studies dorm, so if he wasn't there, I probably didn't know him.
I'm pretty sure that the guy who wrote I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell was not in the women's studies dorm, unless he was there for horrible purposes. Yeah, so anyways, continue.
Well, fortunately back then, it wasn't in kindergarten through 12th grade, so I didn't encounter it until college. And the way that it's operating today, now that social justice has become so culturally dominant, I'm terrified for kids who are picking it up in elementary school, because it took me 20 years to get out of it. And that was picking up later in life. But yeah, so the way that I got into it was sort of, as I said, by degrees. It presents itself as liberalism. And it's a belief system, although I didn't realize it at the time that it was a belief system. And it's sort of, I think it offers people a system of morality, even though it's very hypocritical, it contradicts itself. But it's like, this is the way to be in the world. The world is about different groups of people who are divided by identity, fighting for power. And we can make the world a better place if we understand these systems of oppression and we redistribute power according to people's identity.
So Marxism then.
Basically, cool. but about identity and power instead of class and wealth.
I mean, it's just Marxism through the prism of Foucault, right? I mean,
yeah, I think I do often describe it that way, as sort of as other people do, a marriage between postmodernism and Marxism. But there are some Marxists who get hung up on the fact that it's not about class, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's not Marxism." I'm like, no, I get that. It's sort of mutated. It's something a little different. It's about power and identity. But no, I got into it because what they kind of do is they're like, hey, have you noticed, like I went in through the feminism door. There's lots of doors. There's the race door, the LGBT door, the fat door, the mental health door.
Is that really people are getting activated because they want to protect the right of people to eat themselves to death without being scrutinized for it?
Oh yes, that's since been sucked up under the umbrella of social justice. So you'll see, I'm sure you've seen online people talking about fat positivity and and you're oppressed if you're fat, and the danger with pulling I think weight into it and pulling mental health into it is that you're now telling all these people who are buying into this belief system that being fat is part of their identity, or having depression is part of their identity, or having a personality disorder is part of their identity, which means that they think of that's like who they are. So there's not an incentive to change those things. In fact, there's a disincentive to change it, because if you look at Lizzo, I think she got mobbed for posting a picture of herself drinking a smoothie.
Yeah, it's internalized fat phobia is how
Yes,
they would refer to
that's
that.
what they'll call it. Yeah,
That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life.
yeah.
But yeah, whatever.
But yeah, so I got pulled in through the feminist work, and basically they're like, well, have you ever experienced sexism? And you know, well, yeah, I'm sure I have a few times, and then they kind of by degrees, it's like, okay, well, sexism is in every interaction. It's you need to put on these glasses, go out into the world. These glasses that help you find the sexism in everything and find the racism in everything. And so then you're once you've accepted that one part of it, then they're like, you know, race is the same way. And by the way, we're going to redefine some words for you. They do that right up front. And I think that's really important because they sort of cut off your ability to think by controlling the language, controlling what words you're allowed to say and what words mean. And so they'll tell you, you know, sexism and racism don't mean what you think they mean. They mean prejudice plus power.
Right. Yeah. The confluence of prejudice and power. That's some kid from that I worked with in politics in Wisconsin, like back in 2012, said that to me, and I'm like, no. No, you may be referring to systemic the concept of systemic racism is what you're saying, but don't redefine words because you're creating an argument at that point that need not exist at all.
You're exactly right.
It's so fucking stupid.
When anybody says that, if I ask them to define it, okay, will you give me your definition of racism? And they're like, well, it's systemic. We have to redefine it because we're talking about systemic racism. I'm like, but there's already a term for systemic racism. It's systemic racism. Like what you're doing by changing the definition of racism to say that it's dependent on a person's race, well, then you're basically saying it's impossible to be racist towards white people, or it's impossible to be sexist towards men.
Or Jews now, by the way, because they're white, according to the left. This was late 2020, when God damn it, I think it was the Washington Post ran a story. Are Jews now considered white people or something like that? Like, oh boy, I mean, I guess
They're doing the same thing with Asians. So,
so
they'll again, it's hypocritical and it's contradictory. Like they'll claim Asians as people of color when it suits their purposes, but then when it doesn't suit their purposes, when it comes to things like test scores and meritocracy and admission rates to universities, then they'll say, well, Asians are white adjacent. They benefit from white privilege.
What is white adjacent? Exactly. Nobody knows.
I think it's off-white, kind of like a wall color.
Eggshell?
Yeah, exactly.
It's my cabinets are white adjacent.
I understand. That's weird. Probably racist. Who knows? I don't know. This is sometimes it is really funny. Like when Larry Elder was called the black face of white supremacy. That's one of the funniest things I've ever, because somebody should do an analysis just on that sentence and what's necessary for the person to believe to have said it. Just unpack that whole statement because it's really fucking funny to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's stupid, but it's like you have to believe that that whiteness isn't. It has nothing to do with your nationality or race or culture, any of that shit. It's whether or not you're on the right side of history. You know what I mean? And we have a word for that already. It's authoritarianism, right? Yeah. Like you don't need the march towards trying to conflate whiteness with authoritarianism. That was the point, right? They could have just said authoritarianism, we're against this and this and this, and everybody would have agreed. Mm-hmm. But it's not a wedge issue at that point. Like there's no, if you say something that everybody agrees with, nothing really happens. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you don't continue to get charity donations that you can buy houses with.
Yeah. Well, they use race, they use all these different categories of identity to hide what they're really about, which is, that's what you just pointed out, is race in the end doesn't actually matter to them, it's a tool. So if a black person doesn't agree with the ideology, but a white person does, they're going to let the white person speak. They don't even follow their own rules when they're like, white people need to shut up and sit down and listen. Well, they don't mean that. If you're a white person who speaks the beliefs, you can continue to speak. But if you're a black person like Terrence K. Williams or Candace Owens or Larry Elder, who doesn't speak the belief system, then they want you to shut up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And now you're starting to see a lot of it from the gender thing as well.
Yes.
I don't remember who it was. People maybe, or Slate or Atlantic. It was some not like major newspaper, but a pretty serious publication ran a story about how trans women can teach women about femininity, right?
Okay.
First of all, a trans woman, that's not a thing in my opinion. That's not a thing. That's a dude. I'm tired of participating in everybody's fucking delusions, frankly. I know people have, excuse me, mixed feelings on this, but if I keep hearing phrases like biological male or female penis, like I'm just, as soon as somebody says that, then I'm not listening to anything else they have to say, frankly, because I think that's fucking stupid.
Well, what they've done is, again, they kind of go in and they seize on these different categories of identity. They claim that group as their own. They claim to speak for that group. And in the case of trans people, it's like historically there's been a small percentage of like a fraction of 1% of people who've grappled with gender dysphoria and feeling like they are so-called trapped in the wrong body.
Right.
And it's been like 0.02%. It's something very small. They've now exploded that into, I think the last stat I read was there's been a 4,000% increase in the number of young people who are identifying as trans.
Well, you broaden the definition, right?
Yes.
And then it's a bigger bucket of people to fight against whatever you're trying to fight
And
against.
if you talk to any of those OG trans people, they're not on board with this shit.
No.
Like, they're like, this is bad for me because now everybody, and I've seen it, they're like getting lumped in with all of these trans trenders and with the people who want to trans kids and push it, in kindergarten. And it's like, I interviewed Buck Angel once. Do you know who he is? I do call him he. I basically, for me, I determine if I use a person's preferred pronouns or not. It's based on whether or not I think they're trying to force me to. Also, it's based on what comes naturally to me. If they've successfully are passing, and it just in my brain says he. When I look at Buck, I say he. And it also has to do with whether or not they're making up words. I don't use they or them or any of those z and zer and all that stuff. But I interviewed Buck, and they call him Trampa. He was like the first person in California who, biological woman, I know what you just said, but woman who decided to live as a man and went through gender reassignment surgery, was the first person in California to do that. And he's one of the loudest voices against all of this trans trending and against transing kids, because he's like, I'm getting lumped in, and I don't want to speak for him, but they're getting lumped in with this huge explosion in, honestly, I think a lot of it is a social contagion.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's sort of like, do you remember, I don't want to age you, but do you remember the explosion in anorexia and cutting and all that stuff in the 90s and the aughts? It became a big thing. This is what's happening with kids now, is it's sort of everybody and their friends. It's like, oh, and I'm trans and that person's trans and genderqueer and we're all.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty effective strategy. You don't necessarily have to convince anybody of anything. You just start redefining terms, right? Like you talked about morality earlier, in the absence of organized religion that's happened through our generation specifically, and then forward, we didn't find a suitable replacement for that. And these fucking vultures took advantage. That's what happened. It's a power vacuum. And that's not an advertisement for organized religion, by the way. I don't give a fuck about any of that stuff. But people need purpose and principles to guide their lives, right? You need guardrails in life, a purpose. If you're going nowhere, you're gonna fucking get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you don't have a fucking map or some shit, you're just gonna wander. And maybe that's who you want to be. Good luck. But you're very susceptible to bad ideas.
Are you a believer in God?
No. But I don't really. I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it either. You know what I mean? It's.
Do you live by some of the Christian principles, even though you're not a believer, would you say?
Christian
or
Jewish.
Or do you have guide rails that you live by that?
Sure. I mean, like, I think basic shit, like you would have learned in the fucking Boy Scouts. Do, like, the golden rule that has existed in every major religion in human history. And leave things better than you found it. You know what I mean? Put others before yourself, shit like that. Those are the only things that I really take out of religion.
Yeah.
Although there's some pretty interesting stories. I think the stories in religion are really good. at unpacking why people believe what they think or what they believe, and then that allows for a lot of criticism, which is good because you can refine beliefs with criticism. So I do study it quite a bit. I actually went to school for religion back in the day.
Oh, wow.
But
Have you ever heard, well, speaking of the stories being good at unpacking things, have you ever heard Jordan Peterson talk about the Cain and Abel story?
I don't know if I've heard that one specifically, but I've heard some of his biblical lectures.
So that's really interesting because, and that was one of the things, when people always ask, like, how did you leave social justice? And it's like getting into a cult takes a long time. It's by degrees, and so does leaving one. But that lecture, there's an old YouTube video, I think it's from the 80s. He did a lecture called Tragedy versus Evil. And in it, he said, the Cain and Abel story, even if you don't believe in God, the Cain and Abel story is a good allegory for how to be in the world.
Yeah.
And he's like, you basically got these two characters. You've got Cain, who behaves in a very resentful way, is arrogant, doesn't make the necessary sacrifices to get what he wants. And it ultimately leads to this resentment, envy, jealousy,
So Cain's
and
like
rage.
he's like a modern Instagram influencer. Basically.
Yes, he's like a modern SJW. He's like, why not me, God?
Yeah.
Why Abel? And then Abel lives with gratitude, humility, makes the sacrifices, and that stuck with me. Like that, because I started thinking about all my choices every day, and my ideology, social justice on a big scale. So much of it is based in entitlement, resentment, all those things. It's like, what am I owed? What's everybody else getting instead of me?
Yeah.
Always seeing the negative in everything.
Yeah, I mean, life's not fair.
Yeah.
Sorry. I hate to break it to anybody in the audience out there, but life is just not ever going to be fair. And it also, the Cain and Abel story, the thing that I always took from it is that it matters what you value. You know what I mean? Like if you value taking care of the people around you, that will show in every single action you make. And if you value hoarding things for yourself, same, right? And people will eventually figure you out. And I think a lot of people like yourself are leaving this stupid bullshit. It seems like the only people that are getting converted towards woke now are children, which is, that's how it kind of works.
Actually, I would disagree on that only because I'm in a lot of social justice groups on Facebook just to kind of keep tabs on what they're talking about and doing. There's a lot of boomer white women who are just now getting pulled into it.
That's a good point. Yeah, that happens.
And some of them pull their husbands into it. I think that's
like a browbeaten kind of situation, or like are they actually, and why would they care? Right? Is it just like a reorganization of classic principles? Like, to be a good person now, it's this set of things I have to do.
Yeah. Well, think about it. So you were talking about organized religion and sort of the death of Christianity. It used to be that Christianity was the cultural norm, and that was the way that you showed that you were a good person. And so you have all these. I've just now started realizing, okay, so the same thing that's happening in woke right now, where you have all these virtue signalers and people who are not sincere believers, but now that it's become culturally the norm and dominant. Everybody's getting into it. Everybody's putting the black square on their profile, and everybody's doing the things like, what's the current thing, right? And they're all showing that they're part of this very in vogue belief system, especially in Los Angeles, where I used to live, in certain pockets of the country. But it used to be that way with Christianity. And I think that's just like human nature, is you're going to get sincere believers, and then you're going to get people who are just going with the flow and trying to show their neighbors that they're good people. And then you're going to get a lot of wolves in shepherd's clothing in any ideology. So in Christianity, you'd have the televangelists, the people who are in it for money, fame, power, all that stuff. You got those in woke too. You got like the Robin DiAngelos and the Ibram X. Kendis, and they're making a good buck on it.
And BLM as an entire organization. Yeah, it's pretty bad. There are also quite a few fractures in the American Christian landscape over the years, right? Like depending on what people valued. Some people are like testing God's faith by handling snakes and shit, or testing God's power or whatever the fuck.
You mean literally?
Yeah. Like it's
snake handlers.
Yeah,
okay.
You Church of God people. I'm sure you grew up around some of them. There's a bunch in the Southeast. Then there's televangelists, like you said. There are these persistent revivalist people that are, and then there's, when I was growing up, it was in churches and stuff. It's really interesting because some people had this idea that the image of a Christian person was that they didn't drink, smoke, or swear, right? I don't know what the fuck that's got to do with anything.
Yeah.
And it always reminded me of this anecdote. It was J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis went to J.R.R. Tolkien's house, both Christian dudes, right? And Lewis is smoking a cigar on the porch, knocking on the door, and he opens the door, and Tolkien's holding a glass of whiskey, and he drinks some of it, and he goes, "Hey, welcome in." He goes, "How can you be a Christian and drink that?" And he looks at C.S. Lewis, "Well, how can you be a Christian and smoke that?" And they both laughed and went inside and had a conversation. It's just weird how we fucking decide to value these things.
There's a Bible verse about that, and I'm going to mangle it because I'm a pretty new Christian, and I almost want to do a series called Christianity for Dummies, where you just are trying, like Drunk History, where you're trying to explain Bible verses, but you don't. But there's one Bible verse about that. It's basically like, it's something about how some of your brothers will eat meat and some won't, and it's sort of about like, not everybody is tempted by the same things. Not everybody needs to be. And there's verses in there also about wine. You know, Jesus turned water into wine. People drank, but then there are verses about those who can't. I can't. Like, I know that about me, but it doesn't bother me if you drink.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it's weird. It really comes back to what people, what you choose to value. And now it seems like, I feel like what you choose to value becomes the absolute core of your identity, regardless of what it is. So if you value helping other people, that becomes the core of your identity. If you value the social currency you get from victimhood or from exposure, whatever it is, right? Even whether it's fame or fame for not a great reason, that also becomes the core part of your character. And really important for a young person to make good decisions about what they value. And we're really fucking them over right now.
Here's one problem with that, though, that I saw this play out. A lot of people in social justice think that they value helping other people.
Oh, yeah.
That's why they're in it.
Well, that's the same thing with Marxism. These people, they don't fucking love poor people. They hate rich people.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's all based, like you said, in resentment. The entire ideology is it's rooted in resentment. Because you don't see hyper successful people getting involved in this. Like they'll donate their money and social media to it, but actually doing something, they don't ever do any of this stuff. The people that are rioting are kids that never experienced life before, for the most part, right? Like 19-year-old white kids in the Pacific Northwest who've never faced any real challenge in their life. I just think they have oppression FOMO. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like it's the only social currency that really matters anymore.
Yeah.
Like if you were who's the most charitable person in the country? Who does the most for charity in this country?
Well, Beto, he gives himself.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
right. Like for real, we could not make a list of 10 names of the most charitable, helpful people in this country right now.
Dolly Parton does a lot.
That's one.
Yeah, that's the only one.
But we couldn't make a list. Like you couldn't sit down and make a legit list of that because no one gives a fuck about that stuff. No one cares, and maybe that's just the human condition that people don't care about solutions. They only care about treatment for things, right? Because anytime somebody at a lower class level or whatever the caste happens to be will have an idea, you know what, I think we can solve this problem by doing this. Now they have to get powerful and or rich people involved, and they have motive, right? That's a different situation. It happens in business all the time. You see it happen in business. And that's what makes this shit with Elon Musk and Twitter so interesting to me, because he definitely has a motive, right? Like I'm pretty sure they signed a deal today to use Twitter's data to help process Tesla's AI engines and stuff like that. So this is not about free speech absolutism, clearly, because he fucking does as much business with China as he does with America. And those people are horrible human beings, the Chinese government. But he doesn't need help from anybody. Like he can do whatever the fuck he wants. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I think we're all going to be hunted by robot dogs within the next 5 years, probably.
Oh, yeah. You've seen those in Singapore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
You think things are going to get worse before they get better?
I don't think things are going to get better.
Oh. I think they will. I just think it's going to get really dark first.
Maybe. I don't see any evidence that things would get better. I mean, other than just history, things tend to normalize. But 99.9997% of all species that have ever existed are now gone from the planet, right? And we're just another one of them.
Have you heard of this book, The Fourth Turning? It's really interesting. It's sort of these two historians. They said, hey, you can look at time. We've gotten to where we kind of look at it just linear now, but humans used to look at time as cyclical, and we still do in some ways. Like we restart the calendar every year, and we restart an hour every 60 minutes. But they were like, you can look at the course of history as cyclical as well. And their hypothesis of the book is basically that you're sort of in this 100 to 120 year cycle, and they divide the cycle into 4 pieces. And so they wrote this book in '96, and they said we're about to enter the fourth turning. And after the fourth turning, though, then comes renewal again, if you were buy into their hypothesis. But
I'll read it. I mean, that sounds interesting to me. I feel like technology has changed things quite a bit. AI specifically has changed things quite a bit. We keep making this dystopian films and writing dystopian books about technology and how it's going to fuck us up, and then and instead of using that as a warning, they're like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that."
yeah,
The fuck is wrong with you, man?
Can I jump in there 1 second?
Yeah, go
Have you
ahead.
heard Mark Andreessen? He's one of the board members of Facebook. Talk about metaverse. So one of the most interesting things and scary things he was saying is he was using social justice language to talk about why metaverse is necessarily a good thing. He said most people don't live with reality privilege. Okay, there's only a select few of the elite who have reality privilege and enough wealth and resources and power and to be able to have the best looking mates and the best jobs and whatever. And so metaverse is basically we're helping all you poor plebes to have this better digital world, this virtual reality, because you don't have reality privilege. And he called the real world meatverse.
Doesn't that sound a lot like Soma,
Yes.
the drug?
Yes.
Jesus fucking Christ, man. That's really dumb. But you can tell how these people think. They're just saying shit out loud now.
Yeah.
These meetings in Davos at the World Economic Forum and people talking about the metaverse and shit. It's like, all right, cool. So you're just a digital feudalist then. That's what we're going to do? Sweet. I mean, you reduce the world to the digital world, ultimately, and then you are the one that controls the digital world. So you didn't have to take over the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You created your own public sphere, and then people were forced into it. That's a different kind of situation. It's like herding cattle. You know what I mean? Like you don't necessarily have to own the land where you find them. You just have to put them in a pen somewhere, and then they belong to you.
Oh yeah.
And if you don't feel like you're part of a herd right now, you should pay more attention, probably, because you definitely are. I want to get back into this woke bullshit.
Okay.
It's so like ubiquitously annoying how I find it hard to address these drones individually. You know what I mean? Because it's just like the same responses over and over. But I do realize that in a lot of cases, if not most cases, it comes from some kind of good place, right? A lot of it are kids that are misled by adults or people who they've missed the point entirely. They think that like victimhood and notoriety of activism is the point instead of the result of the activism itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the point was to put the fire out, not to get a badge for it or to say I'm against fire and get a badge for that. Especially they think victimhood and is like the ultimate social currency. But if you applied that logic, I guess this is fat phobic. If you applied that logic to eating, you'd only eat things that gave you that dopamine hit, like sugar, basically, and you would be a fat dummy with diabetes.
Yeah.
Immediately, like in every other area of our life, this would be completely self-destructive behavior, and it clearly is socially as well. And nobody seems to have where are all the activists who really care about poverty? I mean, Michael Schellenberg was one of them. But where's the groups of activists who really care about the human condition, who care about poverty, who care about stopping wars and blah blah blah? Where are they?
They're, well, here in Austin, Community First. Have you been there?
I don't think so.
So this is a group of Christian. It's privately funded, mostly through, I think, different churches. And they've created this community for the homeless where I think I went on a tour there a couple years ago. And at the time, anyway, they had maybe 100 to 200 beds. And it's all like tiny houses and mobile homes. And they're really trying to get people to integrate back into the community, not just giving them resources. They have to pay a meager rent. They have to have some kind of job. So this
is Schellenberger's model. Like
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's housing first with conditions.
Yes.
Like you have to
responsibility.
You have to pass drug tests. You have to get a job. Blah blah blah. And then the housing. You're staying in the housing is based on whether or not you fulfill these things. Which is a good thing. Like, people think that might sound cruel or something. Like, no, you're retraining somebody how to live as a human being.
Yeah, you're loving them.
Yeah.
And that's loving looks like boundaries sometimes, or it looks like responsibility. And yeah, I think they're doing a great job because they have a certain percentage of the people who live there are not homeless. They're people who are part of the charity, and they have concerts and stuff. You can go. They're trying to really integrate, like I said, people back into the community, so they bring the community to them. And I know when I was there, they said that San Francisco had just sent some government officials to come and take a tour and see if they could learn something. I'm like, they're not going to learn anything because that's the government.
Yeah.
I don't think the government can do this. I think it's up to private charities and if they get it right. But then there's also a lot of charities that are just sort of operating as what do they call it? The nonprofit industrial complex where they're just making money for themselves. Like Bono. I think he gives, 1% of the money he raises through his charity actually goes to the causes.
Well, the legal amount required is 2%.
Oh, okay.
That's
Somebody should look that up and check me, but it was something crazy.
I'm sure it's not, he's not a great person. I think South Park did a bit on that back in the day. But it's, it seems like the prioritization, and it's what I come back to a lot in this conversation, what you value is the dopamine hit, right? Yeah. Like this being part of the social in-group, especially when it's moralized like that. And if this goes for food or exercise or drugs, alcohol, whatever, life in general. If you're constantly chasing a dopamine hit instead of the actual purpose, you're not an activist, you're an addict, right? You are like physically, chemically addicted to the dopamine hit that you get from having the Ukrainian flag on your fucking bio. It's stupid.
Yeah. It's like in the Bible. It's the Pharisees who stand on street corners so that they may be seen praying.
Yeah.
If your motivation is to be seen doing it, and not that public prayer or a public announcement of whatever your beliefs are is bad. It's just if your motivation to do that is to be seen doing it, is to get that that virtue signaling credit, to get that dopamine rush that you're talking about, then that's what it's like. I kind of think of the Pharisees in the Bible as the OG virtue signalers. They're like putting the black square in the profile.
Yeah.
What
do you think it was for you, the dopamine hit? Was it like being part of the in group, not feeling like a bad person or feeling like a good person, or being on the right side of history, or something else? Like,
it was being on the right side of history. I really sincerely believed that I know it sounds silly once you get out of it, but I really believe that it was about ending oppression and ending racism and ending sexism. And the further you get into it, though, the more of these new definitions they want you to accept, the more words you can't use. I didn't realize over time, it's like a cult. I read a lot about cults now, trying to understand it, because they cut off, if your brain's like, sometimes I picture like a mouse in a maze and it's got all these different avenues. They cut off all the avenues. There's just one path. You can't interact with these people. You can't read these sources. You can't watch these lectures, but they tell you what to think about all those things.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize a lot of my opinions were not my own. It wasn't until I heard Peterson, among others, talking about received opinions and stuff that I started thinking about all the things I thought I believed. And I'm like, have I actually done the work to hold that opinion? No, I thought a good example, Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder. I was like, these guys are right-wing misogynists or whatever. I had never listened to them. I just thought I knew. And I think a lot of people do that. And the further you get away from that, I mean, it takes like being able to say, well, I don't know enough about that topic to have an opinion. And I don't see that enough on social media. But I'll admit that now, even when it makes me look stupid, because it's the truth. It's like, if people want to talk about climate change, I'm like, I don't know. Honestly, there's so many things on my list that I want to read about now and figure out my opinion on, and that's kind of at the bottom. So I don't know if I'll ever have an opinion on it.
Schellenberger's got a good book about that, about climate alarmists.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's good.
The only thing I do have an opinion on is I think the government will use anything to gain more power.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, never let a good tragedy go to waste.
Yeah.
Right? So...
But there are a lot of, I think, well-intentioned people in it. And you said a lot, or maybe most. I don't know if it's most. Now that it's become so popular, I think there's a lot of people in it with bad intentions. And they're just doing what you're talking about, getting the dopamine hit, showing that they're part of the tribe, showing that they're good people, and they're not really. So I used to work in, when I graduated, I've moved into entertainment. So I worked with a lot of comedians. I produced a television show called Totally Biased, which was one of the wokest comedy shows. I thought we were doing such great work.
Kamau Bell?
Yes. And
he's terrible.
He's gone more woke. It's weird. There were these different inflection points or sort of acceleration points that have happened. One of them was the 2016 election. That's when I started waking up. Another was George Floyd. And when these things happen, I think it's caused some people like myself to start seeing things we couldn't see before because it's accelerated. And so in 2016, I started seeing things I had been blind to. I saw videos on YouTube of people on my side, social justice leftists, like attacking Trump supporters, physically bloodying people. And that was like a crack in my foundation of beliefs because I didn't think that was happening.
Right.
But then what it did for other people like him is they just they've gone so far into it now.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're a true believer, then it's just a constant cycle of confirmation bias. Like you have to recreate reality to fit your fucking narrative, regardless of what happens. Like a black man can be the blackface of white supremacy, for example. You can say ridiculous things that have nothing to do with reality whatsoever, like all the gender talk and all this stuff, because your point has to be right. That's the point. We have to do whatever we can to make sure that this is right, not make sure we have the right answer.
Right.
Like being right is more important than finding the right answer. That's a big problem. It's not very Socratic.
Right. But some of those things are so like you're talking. They're so. It's a confrontation of reality right in your face, and I guess people have different. What James Lindsay calls woke breaking points, because for me it was 2016. But I know others who've woken up since then. That didn't wake them up. It was once it became really popular in the past couple of years, they started to wake up. I'm really interested in what that point is for certain people. It's like, when did you start to see that reality doesn't match what my beliefs are? But part of that, and I'm talking a lot, so if I say this, part of that is I think leaving it is so hard because we were talking about with identity, people have their whole identity invested in it.
Yeah.
This is who I am. My beliefs are who I am, which is false. Your beliefs are not who you are.
No.
And I think we have to help people understand, like, you're not your ideas. If we want them to leave a bad belief system, they have to first separate them from those beliefs as being who they are.
Right. Nobody will fight harder to preserve a lie than somebody that's wasting their life believing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's an absolute fact. And it used to be people were on this sort of cycle. So Churchill famously said, a young conservative has no heart and an old liberal has no brain, right? This is a lot like this whole woke shit is almost mirrored in the conservative versus liberal war that's going on in America, which is in no way conservative and in no way liberal.
I agree.
You know what I mean? It's just the reality of what these words mean and what these ideologies are have been obfuscated so much by all of this fucking nonsense that nobody knows what's going on. We haven't had a real conservative government in place since maybe Nixon, but probably Eisenhower, right? Like Reagan raised taxes, got us into wars, blah, blah, blah. George H.W. Bush was okay, I guess, but George W. Bush presided over the largest expansion of federal government history. So we don't have two differing sides with the same goal arguing the merits of their individual ideologies anymore. We just have crazy assholes that are hungry for power, right? And whatever the thing is for their side, or whatever they're for it, regardless of reality, and whatever the thing is for the other side, they're against it, regardless of reality. That is not a conversation that's happening in good faith. Yeah. And this woke bullshit is not happening in good faith. It's really important that young people who are motivated and looser in their belief systems process all the new information for the new reality we're in. And older people who are wiser and more informed put that through a filter and make it into policy that helps everybody out. And that system continues, right? But we don't have that anymore. Like you said, these older white women are getting captured by wokeness. That's fucking bad. You know what I mean? Like if your system is dependent on that turnover, it's like planting the same crop in the same field over and over and over again. At some point, the fucking minerals are exhausted. And I think we're at that point in America. Like if there's a lot of people on the right worry about like armed conflict and stuff after all the violence from the left in the last couple of years. What would that even look like? What's the demarcation line between one side and the other? I have no idea. Who would fight on whose side if there was a civil war in America? There's no fucking way. It's not geographically. Yeah. Because these cities in each one of these places are going to fucking be left. And the rest is going to be right, typically. So what is it? I have no idea. Like we're not playing a real game here. Yeah. So I don't know. That's why I'm not very hopeful.
Well, you're here in Texas. Are you familiar with the Texit movement? Yeah,
I think Texas should secede immediately. Yeah. I also think that there should be a nationwide tax strike until my money stops getting spent on blowing up brown people, right? Wherever we fucking feel like doing it, and for whatever justification, or giving money to Ukraine to fight their war. You fight your own fucking war, dude. We're tired of this shit. Or giving $90 billion worth of shit to the Taliban, for example. Like if it was a kid, it's your teenager, and you left him at home for the weekend, the government of America has burned the house down, right? They have exhausted all trust we should ever have in them again. So yeah, I don't know why people get so romantic about the United States. Like it's the principles that matter.
I agree.
In my opinion. Not like I enjoy this flag. I think it looks great. But the Texas flag is just like that little corner right there.
Yeah, the old one, the blue.
It's just the one star in the bottom, and then I think that's pretty dope. I think we should get back to that. You
should talk to Daniel Miller sometime. He wrote the book Texit, and he was running for a lieutenant governor, and I think I think he's brilliant. He changed my mind on a lot of things. I didn't think secession or exiting the union was something that was possible until I talked to him, and it's a growing, statistically, like the numbers he was talking about and the ones he put in his book, it's a growing cultural movement. There's a lot of Latino people in Texas who support it.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, they're seeing all of their hard work to build their communities and go through the correct legal process to get here, or having been here for generations now, get wiped out by just a complete open border policy. That's got to suck, right? Yeah. I mean, it's almost like you went to school, and even graduate school, and paid for all your shit, and now all these fucking losers with liberal arts degrees are begging to get their fucking shit paid for. Probably kind of feels like that, right? Yeah. Like,
isn't that happening?
Yes. Well, I don't think it'll actually happen. I think Biden, anytime they get in too much trouble, they float like, "Hey, we're seriously discussing this," but there's no fucking way. Yeah. Like they're gonna get hammered in November this year, regardless. If they did that, it would be way worse.
You think they are? I have no idea about politics. About.
It's gonna be rough. I mean, so one of the inflection points, as Lindsay likes to call it, is the groomer shit with kids, right? Mm-hmm. So we saw it in Virginia, and it wasn't even about the sexuality part. It was just about the race part, the CRT part, with Youngkin winning a race that he had no business winning. And I don't mean he's not qualified for it. I mean, that's a pretty solidly blue area. Man, I think it was the kids. I think a lot of these woke white ladies are unwoking really fast because people are fucking with their kids. And that's probably why people like Buck and others are so fucking pissed off about getting lumped in with all these dum-dums, because that's literally the one place you can't go.
Yeah.
Of all the things you might try to do, you come after people's kids and you activate fucking all these crazy soccer mom bulldog people that are they don't give a fuck about you. They'll fight you in the parking lot. You know what I mean? It's this crazy shit. It's why would you pick a fight with them? You had them. Why now? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think it's a lot of the normies who, I love normies. They're living life. They have jobs. They are providing for their kids, but they're becoming aware of everything that's going on. And I just talked to 2 parents in Grapevine Colleyville School District here in Texas. They have an election happening right now. I'll mention that if anyone happens to be there. It's a school board election. And these parents are motivated. They're organized. They have put together a whole packet of not just the CRT in the classroom, in the teacher trainings, explicitly called CRT in the teacher trainings, but also the sexually explicit material that's in the classroom, material that's so explicit they can't even go to school board meetings and read from it. They get told it's inappropriate to read, but it's okay for my 9th grader to read that and have to do a report on it as part of the enforced curriculum. So I think it's a lot of grassroots normie parents who are waking up, and I don't pay much attention, I guess, to national politics anymore, but I think these local elections are really important.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the local elections are always the most important, in my opinion. It seems like there are levels, like you were saying, to this ideology, like Dante's Inferno or some shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's some gravity to it. Like, some people dabble in it a little bit. I think the wealthy people that are people on Twitter that just put shit in their bio, they're just like a man who is clearly a man who has no fucking gender dysphoria, whatever the fuck, and still has he, him in his fucking profile. Who's that for? Mm-hmm. What is that exactly? What's your intent or motivation with that? Yeah. What's your intent or motivation with putting a fucking yellow flower or a Ukrainian flag? And you're like, what is that? What are you accomplishing exactly except for making you feel better? Mm-hmm. And isn't that kind of pathetic? You know what I mean? But anyways, people dabble. They put Ukrainian flags in their bio. There are people who back the actions up, donating to charity or showing up to protests or activism in the voting arena, whatever that happens to be. Then there are people who riot, people who say crazy things. And of course, there's the profiteers like Ibram X. Kendi and people like that. To me, it seems like you get sucked further into the madness. Mm-hmm. Like the more time goes on, maybe. And I think it happens to a lot of people without them really understanding how they got. Like you.
Yes.
It's like mission creep. Like you all of a sudden wake up and you're like, wait, what? Who are these people that I'm surrounded by now? Yeah. I wonder, from your perspective, it sounds like you kind of just dug your way out. But how does the broader culture in America reach down and give these people a hand out of this shit? Or is that even possible?
That's why I think things have to get really dark, because on an individual level, almost every person I've talked to who's left social justice or any other kind of cult, they had to have a personal breakdown of sorts, because...
So it's like an addict. Like you can't be helped until you're fucking
And
rock
so
bottom.
the country has to do that, because I had to get to a place where, again, talking about how hard it is to leave, people built their whole identity on this belief system. And it's like, there's this guy named George Lakoff. He wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. And I read this when I was a leftist. He wrote it for leftists to try and explain why conservatives can disregard facts that don't fit their house of belief, right? Mm-hmm. And his one blind spot was that it applies to the left too, and especially now it applies to the left. And so if they've built if you think of a belief system like a house, you've built your whole house of belief, somebody gives you a fact that doesn't fit your architecture, you're just going to get rid of it. And what has to happen is your whole belief system has to be razed to the ground. And that's hard for people, because it's like they feel like they're losing everything.
Right.
And the people I know who've left, a lot of times it's coincided with some other breakdown in their life. I mean, I was going through divorce. Mm-hmm. I was being confronted with all this stuff I didn't know was happening. We reached an acceleration point in history and things looked really dark. I saw people in my social justice echo chamber who were celebrating that sniper in Dallas who killed the cops at the Black Lives Matter rally, celebrating that.
Yeah.
That was a wake-up call for me. I saw things I didn't know that I was a part of that. And so it's a long process to break down your whole belief system. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, on a large scale, what has to happen culturally? We have to break down, unfortunately.
I know a lot of people who are like estranged from family members and have lost friends over the last, particularly since 2016, right? Since like August of 2016 when Trump became serious. How do you get that back if you can, right?
It's like a cult, and people contact me a lot because of the show I do about how do I reach my daughter, my brother, my even spouses who are separating over ideology. And there's no book list I can give you. There's nothing. You can't reach people who are in a cult with facts. You need to have the facts on your side. But if you're going to reach them, it has to be through the heart. I know that sounds so cheesy, but it's the truth. It's the emotion. The thing that started to wake me up was, like I said, going in that rabbit hole of YouTube videos of people Trump voters being assaulted, and it left me in tears. Yeah. I didn't know anything that was happening. And that emotional confrontation with what was going on is sort of that first crack I had in my foundation. I will say this, because I've sometimes asked people, give me your advice, because people are always asking me for advice. I talked to this one young guy, much younger than me. He went through woke. He got into it at college. He became estranged from his dad. He called his dad white supremacist, all kinds of things. This was for years. And he said, my dad never stopped loving me. Like, I'm sorry to make me emotional, but he said he never stopped loving me. He would argue with me and tell me why he thought I was wrong, but he never cut me off, even though I cut him off.
Right.
And he said, when I finally did have that crack in my foundation, my beliefs later, I remembered, I could see how he had stayed open to me that whole time.
Yeah.
And he went back and mended that relationship.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, it means Dad's identity wasn't his belief system.
Yes.
Right? His identity was, I'm Dad.
Yeah.
Which, again, it comes back to what you value as a human being.
Yeah.
And I think, like in sports, you stop hitting jump shots or you keep swinging and missing, you go back to fundamentals. You know what I mean? You shoot free throws or hit off the tee, typically. That's how an athlete
I don't know what any of that means, but I'm kidding. This is a sports reference.
I can't think of any non-sports references that would make sense to that. But yeah, you go whenever your performance sucks. It's a really good idea to go back to fundamentals. That's why Peterson always says, identify one thing about yourself that you're doing wrong, and then figure out a way you can do it better or right. You know what I mean? That's a really important step for people. And in sociology, in my opinion, and that's a behavioral thing, but just in the way that your identity works and how you feel about who you are as a person, going back to fundamentals is a really good idea for people. What is it that I actually value? And do the things I believe and the things I'm doing reflect my values? That seems like a pretty easy, like you can certainly delude yourself in that process quite a bit, but man, it seems like a better option than just assuming you're correct and doubling down on that shit. You know what I mean? That's fucking stupid.
Like, who am I and what do I believe? That happened to me. I went way down to the first thing I knew, because I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore or what I believe about anything. I was like, well, I like dogs. And that's my first thing. I was like, I mean, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And my whole identity when you're in the social justice cult anyway, your whole identity is, they've convinced you, you've convinced yourself, it's all wrapped up in your race and your sex and sexuality and all that stuff. That's bullshit.
Well,
none of that means anything.
If you can convince someone that there is an existential threat, they will do anything, like crazy shit, to stop it from happening. Like climate alarmism, or if you make everything about race or sexuality or whatever the fuck, right? If you convince them that there's some kind of existential threat to the things that they value, the democracy, not that we are one, right? We're a fucking republic, but let's just say that was accurate. People value the comforts they have in life. And they think that if Republicans get involved, or conservatives, or whomever, right? Even liberals from the conservative side, if they get involved too much in government, then we're going to lose everything. Well, that's not really true, right? Like none of that stuff's true, but you can pretty easily convince people that it is.
Yes.
Because they need a boogeyman. One of the things I guess you're doing to combat some of this horse shit is the civility dinners. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I haven't had one in a while, actually, but I want to start doing them again here in Austin, so I'll let you guys know.
Yeah. I'll come. I mean,
awesome.
I'm not the most, I'm just kidding.
The civility dinners, I started those right after I moved to here in 2016, because I was at the very beginning of trying to reevaluate everything I believe, figure out what I actually did believe about things. I was examining my old belief system, and I wanted to talk to people who disagree with me. Also, I was one of those people who cried the night Trump won. I didn't know he was going to win, and I still believed, even though I had started questioning things, I still believed he was some demagogue, and I wanted to understand why he won. At the beginning, I was like, we have to understand why he won so we can keep him from winning next time.
Yeah, the postmortem.
But all the people in my cult were like, no, he just won because of racism and sexism. That's all you need to know. They didn't like me asking questions. Yeah. So I wanted to meet some conservatives, and actually I went to a Mike Cernovich meetup here in Austin so I could meet conservatives. Actually met some liberals there. I'm like, wait, I'm not the only one who's here. But I did meet some conservatives, and I started having these dinners. And the people who come, there's like Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, atheists, Christians, but it self-selects for people who want to talk to people who disagree with them.
Yeah.
So none of the ideologues are coming. There's no social justice people who come. They don't want to be there. But you do get to talk with interesting people. A lot of times over the course of doing these, I found that the people who would come were kind of didn't fit in the box of whatever their beliefs were anyway. Like I remember one dinner we were talking about the Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, and I'm a liberal, but I was there arguing against his grandstanding knee taking, and the conservative there was arguing on behalf of it. And I was like, this is so interesting.
Well, but the weird thing about that is both of you are right. Like he does have the right to do that. Mm-hmm. And you can call it disrespectful to troops or whatever the fuck, but that's the point of fighting, so that people can do stupid shit like that. I mean, it sucks to admit that, but it also, you have to take his intent into account there. He's clearly a self-righteous asshole. You know what I mean? You can tell from all of his other behavior, the way he's conducted himself. One of the things I like to say, and it's something I say about Ukraine and Russia a lot, is that it's perfectly reasonable to not take sides in a fight between two assholes, right? And in this case, I think it's perfectly reasonable to accept that both people had good motivations for the thing they're doing, and we can talk about execution if you want, but there's no reason to fucking paint them as right or wrong or good or bad or any of that bullshit. Like, that doesn't contribute anything to the conversation. That all that does is make people entrench further into their position, and we make no progress towards whatever the actual solution is. Doesn't make any sense to me. So Boghossian does good work on this too.
Oh yeah, Peter Boghossian.
How to have difficult conversations. That's a really
James Lindsay.
Yeah, very good. Those guys. I mean, Lindsay can have difficult conversations because he's a dick and doesn't care about the outcome necessarily. Like if people get offended, but Boghossian, and I think that's a good part. That's a good thing because he gets people to say stuff out loud that they might not have if they hadn't been a little upset, right? Which is a good thing for not to expose them or anything, but for them to have said it out loud and be able to reflect on what they just said. Yeah. I think that's an important thing. Being a fucking antagonist is important sometimes. Boghossian is just like the fucking most linear thinking person I've ever met. It's something is either right or wrong for him. And I think that's good because he's not intellectually lazy, so he'll follow the entire idea chain. Be like, all right, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense. And when he gets to the end and doesn't understand it, he'll be like, I don't understand it. There's no reason for me to opine on this because I don't know what I'm talking about. That's it.
I don't know as much about him. I just saw James Lindsay at the Better Discourse Conference.
Yeah, he's a troll. I love watching him troll.
Yeah, and that's another organization that's doing a lot of great work around having conversations, myth-informed.
Yeah.
They've done the last two. They're based in Milwaukee, but they've done the last two conferences here in Texas.
Well, they're moving. So Bogosian and those guys are opening up, and Barry Weiss and a couple other people are opening up the University of Austin, which isn't a real, I guess, a university. It's just like an anti-woke academic
It's
establishment.
in the metaverse.
Yeah, maybe. So I think I wanted to touch on something you just said about, because I assume that the vast majority of this audience feels kind of the same, like they're like a person without a country or a person without a political home. I don't think it's because they've changed. I think it's because we've redefined the political parties, and nobody's willing to acknowledge it. People still refer to Republicans as conservatives.
Yep.
Where's the evidence of that? Right? There is a definition of conservatism and a definition of liberalism. And to whom does it apply in our political spectrum right now? I don't think it does. I don't think those are the two things that we're using as a measurement system anymore.
I agree. It's dead.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to drive division, though. So
Mm-hmm.
all the political elite, the media, they still talk about this whole right-left division, and I know people who still believe in it. Like, they believe that matters. If you're conservative or liberal, it doesn't. I don't even know. Like you said, I have to ask people to even define what those words mean, because I don't know what you mean when you say liberal until you tell me. And same thing for conservative. Right now, I think the most important division, and this is what they're trying to obfuscate by focusing on right-left, is, are you an authoritarian or are you an individualist? Do you believe that the government has the right to control individuals and to even tell you that you can't go to work and you can't leave your house and you have to shut your business down? Does the government have the right to do that?
Right.
Do they have the right to force you to take an injection? Or do you believe that individuals have the right to control their own life and to pursue life, liberty, and happiness? And that division is not right-left. I know people, when the lockdowns first started and the mask mandates here in Texas, in my little town in Georgetown, they would have, every weekend there was an anti-mask protest. And you know who was running that protest? It was a lot of progressive lefty hippies, but they were actual lefties. They were actual anti-authoritarians. And then I had some conservative family members, a little more authoritarian, some of them in South Carolina, who supported the mask mandates and the lockdowns. And I was like, okay, this is clearly an authoritarian libertarian split on this issue. And then what happened? The media came in and tried to make it right-left, and then everyone follows their tribe. Not everyone, but the masses.
Well, I mean, it's people either follow the tribe or they stand still, and effectively that's the same, because when it comes time to vote, if they haven't moved in one direction or another, they're just going to vote the way they always have, typically. Like, people don't switch parties much, but there's about 18% of the country that varies from year to year, give or take. Yeah, it's interesting to talk about that, about how the battle lines are drawn, for lack of a better phrase. I would consider people who are actually conservative or liberal to be playing a football game right now, or whatever, or they're trying to play a football game, and these woke idiot leftists and these fucking crony capitalists are naked fans running across the field and interrupting the fucking game. That's how I feel about that. Like, they are not playing the same game everybody else is. They're just trying to profiteer off division. That's all they're doing.
Well, and they're on the same naked team right now too.
Yeah. It's controlled opposition.
Yeah.
From one election to another, with a couple of outstanding voices. I mean, notice how AOC is so crazy on social media, but when it comes time to vote, she's in lockstep with the DNC every single time. Every single fucking time. It's very bizarre.
Why do you think that is?
Because she wants to maintain her relevance. If she goes hard against the DNC, she doesn't get the $16 million in contributions that it takes to win her fucking district. That's why. It's all about propagating your own authority and power.
So what part of that is a farce, or is it all a farce? Like, is she the radical she is on social media, or is she that person who votes in lockstep?
I mean, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Chances are she believes what she's saying, and has also convinced herself that you have to play the game to make any, and that is the corrupting part of American politics, right? There's a lot of people that get involved in politics with good intentions, but the ones who retire after one session, those are the ones I actually trust. right? Like, I don't trust Tulsi Gabbard completely because she has some weird anti-gun beliefs and stuff like that. But as far as her take on individualism and not isolationism, but like non-interventionalism, those are two different things, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a straight up Monroe doctrine, although I will point out for the audience that even during the Monroe period, we were still the North American hegemon. We controlled the Caribbean, and we controlled fucking Mexico and most of Central America as well. But there's a difference between America first and America only. Like, I want to be America first because of the fucking same, again, in the Bible, but it predates the Bible by like 4,000 years. Take care of your own shit before you start going and telling other people what to do, frankly, right?
I think that was in Genesis.
Yeah, it says it exactly like that, yeah. I think it's something about a log in your eye and a splinter in your brother's eye, but our neighbor. But that's an old one. That's been in every major religious text forever, right? It's just because it's common sense. You can't fucking help somebody if you've got a cast on your foot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just doesn't work that way. So get your shit right first. Like, instead of sending $2 billion over the last 3 months to Ukraine, maybe we should fix our border or feed people something, right? Instead of bitching at Elon Musk for buying Twitter because he's a private citizen using his own goddamn money.
I hear what you're saying. That verse, remove the log from your own eye before you worry about the speck in your neighbor's eye. I hadn't thought of it in that way before, about interventionist policy versus taking care of your country, but you're right. You're absolutely right. That's a great way of thinking of it.
I mean, yeah, I guess. There's nuance there too, right? Maybe we do need to do some stuff abroad to prevent it from coming here, right? Like, you want to create standoff in a military environment for sure, but do we need to have 40 fucking military bases in Europe? Probably not. Doesn't seem like a great idea to me, to be honest. It definitely doesn't seem like a great use of our money. But America first, fine with that. America only, I'm not fine with that because that's not who we are, right? And again, it comes back to what we value. Right now, I don't know what the fuck we value. Like, if somebody told me to make a list of modern American values, I'm not sure I could. I don't know where that list would even start. Because I don't think we have shared values anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that holds a group of people together is shared values. It's either shared values or shared hatred of something. And if we're going to be the latter, then I'm not interested in participating in that.
Yeah. Do you think humans need something to worship in order to have the values lined up correctly? I mean, because you don't believe in a deity, but do you think that most humans need something to worship?
To worship, I'm not sure I like that, right? Because there's an element of bowing and scraping that I'm not really comfortable with. And I think it's kind of anti-individualist to think that there should be something over you, right? But when you choose to contribute to the greater good, yes, you need that. And I think removing the belief system structure from around it and just doing it because it's the right thing to do is important. Not because of the benefit, not because of the punishment if you don't. That's what I think. I think people need to divorce themselves from the outcome and do things because they're the right thing to do. That's my, but I understand most people don't think that way, so maybe you're right. I don't know. It's hard to speak for other people.
I've been shocked. I've encountered people who don't believe that there's a right or wrong or good or evil. And I'm not even talking about the postmodernist wokies. I'm talking about people who say they're for individualism and liberty and stuff. And I'm like, this is why this question, I've started thinking about it a lot, because I think of God as sort of if you don't have something, maybe worship isn't the right word. If you don't have something bigger than yourself, that's like, this is where my morals are coming from, this is where the principles are coming from. If it's just you, then can't you just change? Can't you just? There's no braking mechanism on the car of self-interest. So if you're like, well, I worship reason, okay, well, then you can rationalize anything.
Right.
It's like, well, this is for the greater good. This is for good. I'm going to do this bad thing, but it's because of this reason down the road. And so now I've started to ask people that question. I'm just curious because I'm starting to wonder, is that a human thing that we're built to need something bigger than us, from that's where we get our morals?
Right. I just think it's the easy thing to do would be to create some existence above ours, right? That's the easy thing to do. Finding purpose without, those levels of existence, like in Buddhism, for example, where you reincarnate based on how you behaved in your current life and all that stuff. I mean, that's just like a cast afterlife, frankly. And I think we took what we knew about the world, which was that some people are rich and powerful and some people are poor and feeble, and we transliterated that to there has to be gods, right? There has to be somebody above us. Why would we not be the number one thing? But that comes from the presumption that we're the number one thing. Who gives a shit about that? Like, that doesn't matter. I like Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape is a good book.
Oh, I haven't read that.
You should check it out. It's kind of the scientific case for good and evil. You can reduce it.
Oh, okay.
You can reduce it to the most good you can do is to promote conscious joy, because consciousness is how everything experiences the world. And the worst you can do is to promote conscious suffering, right? So if you want to be a good person, you should be simultaneously trying to minimize conscious suffering and maximize conscious joy. Now, there's also a lot of gray area. Even though it's a scientific analysis, there's still a lot of gray area. Technically, if you wanted to minimize conscious suffering, you could just kill everybody that's suffering, right? Technically, that would, and from a median standpoint, that would raise the rate quite a bit. But obviously, we know for some reason we know that that's not right to do that. I don't know why we know that. Honestly, I have no idea why. I don't think it's something. It's been very rare that a culture popped up that was okay to just kill, and we remember them, right? They're like fatalistic. The Nazis, for example, killing people that are retarded or have physical deformities or some shit, just because, well, we don't want that in the gene pool. We've seen that kind of shit before, and pretty much everybody considers that to be evil. But why, right? You know what I mean? From that perspective, I mean, we know it intrinsically is what I'm saying. And I can't figure out why, but I'm not sure it matters. But that's what I base everything on. You know what I mean? Am I helping or hurting this situation?
Yeah.
And sometimes the answer might be both, but the process of reflecting on what you're doing is important, right? To understand what you're doing, maybe not for that time, but for the next time. And for the example you're setting for other people.
There are some people, in current society, we say they have personality disorders. We used to say they have character disorders, and probably in biblical times we'd say they had demons who, what gives them conscious joy is hurting people.
Sure, yeah.
And
well, that comes back to like English common law, right? You have your right to swing your fist ends at my face. So you can do whatever you want, provided you're not injuring someone else financially or physically, typically. Is how that would go, right? Like American law is just English common law with some additions, and then the tax code, which is ridiculous, but that's a whole other thing.
Sorry, I got you on a tangent.
No, this show is all about tangents, but we got to get going here. So tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your work.
Oh, yeah, so I have a new channel. It's called Deprogram with Keri Smith. You can find me on YouTube, anywhere that you find podcasts. Have a locals, all the things. I'm trying to figure out how to do locals.
Substack, locals, everything.
Yeah,
right?
Substack. Yep. And thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. We appreciate you coming by. You dummies, go check out her channels. And until